filled bar room with nothing but scrawny teenagers all over the place. So within the business establishment, there are people whose intention, we come back to that again, is not to maximize profits and accumulate power and centralize things, but to distribute resources. The problem is, one second, actually, I think the problem is that although the structure has no intention, the structure is more tempting, I guess. It's more susceptible to exploiters than it is to, what should we call ourselves? To progressives? To lovers. There you go. Who said the summer of love is over? It's more, they gravitate towards it naturally and they know exactly how to use it. Whereas for us, we tend to feel more comfortable in less centralized units. So what is to be done? I don't know, but I think maybe both. Continue to develop less centralized units, go to the World Social Forum. Every year it's gotten to be kind of rasty, but we'll put it back together and continue on. And, be just people and have neighborhoods and build it up from there. But at the same time, I personally have no objection if someone wants to use corporate structures and mechanisms in a fair way, even in a mostly fair way. Ashley.
Well, to add on to that, I'm sure many of us in this room are opposed to Starbucks. And it's interesting because Starbucks now gets their scone from my friend who has this business, and she's now the first bakery in the whole world certified. And so it's interesting how they are kind of incorporating this trend, trying to be more fair, trying to be integrated, going to the corporate world. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if there's, of course there's good and bad. Like you said, like if you look at it, you have horrible things that are introduced to the corporate club and greed, but they're trying to clean up their act in some areas too.
Some of them are, and I have a friend who was very well off. He was the biggest peace funder, to my knowledge, in the world. I hung out with him quite a bit, got absolutely nowhere. He started something called Businessmen for Social Responsibility. But he confided in me one time, one of those many talks when he told me he wasn't going to give me any money, that what we are is cheap hawks. Instead of spending billions and billions for weapons, we want to spend somewhat fewer billions for weapons. So that's the further they had gotten at that point. So even in Starbucks itself, you have both good and bad. I suppose the coffee is not that great, actually, between you and me. We're trying to go to Pete's. It might be, das ist Geschmackssache, again. It's just a matter of taste. But okay, they do fair trade. They do, green bakeries. That is, green bakeries. The products are not turning green, you understand? But also, it's all very uniform, and they take over smaller businesses that had a kind of humane character to them. I never shall forget visiting Noam Chomsky at MIT. Is everybody impressed? And we decided to go down the hall and get a cup of coffee, and we're walking down the hall, and he tells me the sad story that we come around the corner and there's an alcove and there's just two coffee machines. You put in 2 dimes or whatever it was in those days, and you get this paper cup of tepid coffee. It was terrible. And he said, there used to be these 2 ladies who had a little coffee concession here, and they would hear me coming down the hallway. They would hear my steps. They'd say, oh, here comes Professor Chomsky, and they would make me exactly the right coffee that I like and have it ready for me when I got there. Okay, so but the university calculated that it was too much money to pay the salaries of these 2 people. So instead, they fired them. They brought in these machines. Guess what? The maintenance cost of these machines is 140% what it cost to pay those 2 ladies in that concession. So it's a system that has to be played, if at all, very carefully. And you have to be very strong in yourself. You have to be an erotic who can get up there and say unprincipled things to these high-powered businessmen when they try and pull you off your course. But that's why I mentioned Mondragon last time, because this is something which is capitalistic in a sense, but it is a humane implementation of capitalism. And as I said it then, and I'll say it again, though I would not have dared say it in the 70s, I'm not opposed to capitalism per se. As a friend of mine said, I'm not opposed to using foreign expressions per se. Yeah. Is it something that, because the intention is correct, it shouldn't even be Oh, okay. This is a really good question, and I think it has to receive a PAX 164B, sophisticated, deep into the gray area, real-world answer, and that is to say that in most of us, intentions are mixed. So when we say that the Saryaku women had good intentions, we're saying that their good intentions dominated at that point. I mean, I can tell you something about Starbucks because a member of my family worked for them. Up to a certain point, they have very good employment practices, and if you went to any city in the world, there's bound to be a Starbucks every 50 yards, right? You could always apply for a job. At the same time, this person made one slight mistake, and she's blackballed forever. You'd never be hired by another Starbucks. Yeah.
I think situations like this always deserves a little more research on your own part. Like Starbucks is, I'm getting the sense, doing a lot these days. They are a big corporation. They still, to some extent, exploit, and they take little places out of business also. And Nestle, for example, they started a campaign about fair trade, and that turned out to be a total greenwash. So that's the term that everybody should be aware of. Greenwashing. 140 products in Nestle, and have 1 or 2 that are not fair trade and advertised everywhere. And then if you go into research, you walk around like, oh, Nestle's fair trade.
Yeah, and that took a lot of greenwashing because if you remember, Nestle was the most hated corporation by lovers in the world because they were literally taking mother's milk away from babies and enslaving populations with this formula. That was like the beginning of what we see now in the Terminator seeds being done by Monsanto. So I would be perfect. Don't get me wrong. You haven't got me at all yet, so you're with it. I would be perfectly okay with it if there were no corporations at all in about 40 years. Not a single one. You can totally reorganize the world on the basis of affinity groups, ashrams, things like that. I would be perfectly happy. But I can also visualize a world in which, and this will be the next and final topic in our course, you can change the culture to the point where enough good intention predominates in enough people so they could use the corporate machinery for good purposes. And I live about half an hour's drive from the first green dairy west of the Rockies. It was started by a family of Holocaust survivors, Strauss Dairy. They completely organic milk, no hormones, no nothing. The cow gets sick, they won't even treat it with hormonal remedies. They have a fleet of electric cars, and they make very good ice cream. It can be done, but we're not talking about a mega corporation. We're talking basically about an extended family business. So it gets, for some funny reason, it gets hard. The bigger you get, the harder it is to keep your good intentions in play. Don't know what that reason is. Zoe? Go ahead, let's hear it for Strauss's yogurt. Yeah, I hang out with them every Saturday in the local bakery because I feel it's my contribution to the green environment. Yeah, they have very good products. And Matt?
Yeah, I see the more non-violent way would be the paradigm of doing anything to maximize profit and minimizing the bottom line, to help shareholders to change the culture. Just after reading stuff like Confessions of an Economic
Ooh, whoa.
Survival.
Yeah.
So, certainly within this context of, we need to, just make the most money out of everything. I think kind of a bottom up solution to this is just knowing more about global commodity chains, just knowing where it's come from.
Yeah, it's all very
A
helpful.
number of documentaries coming out, one on how beans get from these factories in China to Mardi Gras, and detailing all the kind of those things go. And I think it connects somewhat to Innsbruck, not necessarily like you yourself making the items, but just knowing about them, or where the things they use come from. And a friend of mine has this nonprofit conscious lifestyle. It's about investigating fair trade items,
Yeah.
how you can live a lifestyle that tries to be less
Yeah.
exploitative without
Exploitive.
spend your all your days.
Yeah. Well, that is similar to what Matthias is saying, that you do have to do some fairly careful investigation of where products have come from and what firms are doing. As you say, Matt, it's not possible for one person to do all of that research. At our community, at our ashram, there's one person who got very interested in doing this and so tried to go through and line out products that we shouldn't buy because there was something exploitive in either the manufacturing or delivery or the profit chain or what have you. And she soon began to realize that we'd be running around wearing grass clothing and eating roots and apples, that there's a certain amount of harm involved in all of them. And so ultimately you have to draw a line and say, I'll draw a line here. And it becomes an individual matter. If I could sum up a lot of what we were saying, I think it would be this, that when we are confronted with an exploitive institution, take action, but remember that it is the exploitation and not the institution that's the real problem. And we have to, if we only disestablish the institution, the same people will just roll over and do it again in a different way. If you've seen that wonderful series of Dr. Zhivago, I think it's Dr. Zhivago that I'm thinking of, there's somebody who is very close to the Tsar and serves him very faithfully, and you're worried about him when the revolution comes, you think he's going to be shot, but you find out that he's an important bureaucrat, he's an apparatchik in the revolution, and he simply says, no matter who you are, you need bureaucrats. So you're always going to use bureaucrats. So I'm just saying that again, it's not a different kind of people in power, it's a different kind of power in people. And I'm not saying don't try to disestablish institutions, but don't think that by doing that you've solved the problem, because as long as you have the same culture, people will just rebuild it. So we have to do both, and it requires a lot of canny intelligence in how to proceed. If it's all right with you, I'd like to use the next 8 minutes to talk about a few things that John brought up in his talk. 4 things, actually. There's probably, yeah, Seshi.
I want to ask if you can elaborate more on the last part, the conclusion just made.
Yeah.
I don't know how we can separate the exploitation from the institution, because I feel like the institution was kind of the source of the exploitation, our expecting being
Yeah.
to carry on and carry out the exploitation. So how can we just look at the exploitation not to be?
I guess, Seshi, that's a very good question, and I guess what I'm saying is that in reality, exploitation is a drive. It's an emotion, it's a human drive, and an institution cannot be the source of that drive. It can only be the mechanism through which it is delivered. And the example, I think you missed a class when I was talking about this, but in running over some of the features of globalization from the point of view of nonviolence, I talked about this very poignant remark made by a woman who was very active in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. And I remember in those days people were saying that if South Africa could get over apartheid, the entire continent would be fixed. And that did not quite happen. But one of the things that she said was, we rose up to seize the state only to discover that the state did not exist. Because the institution that was delivering their exploitation was the South African apartheid regime. So they hated it. All their attention went on changing that regime. The South African Constitution guarantees, well, very simply, food, clothing, and shelter to every single South African. And none of that has been delivered. Why? Because of the Bretton Woods institutions that are supranational, that have more power than the government, and demanded that they make certain structural readjustments that, once again, it's more trickle up and more trickle up where wealth is siphoned up to the people who are already wealthy. So I'm not saying, first of all, I'm not saying that every situation is the same. There's somewhere you might want to be mostly against the institution and only partly against the motivation, and somewhere would be the other way around. But generally speaking, our tendency is to get fascinated by the institution and not to see that these are human beings like us. Their negative drives are operating through these mechanisms. Okay, yes, we do have to disrupt that process, but unless we do it in a way that helps them recultivate their intentions, it's not going to solve the problem in any permanent way. We've seen that over and over again. Okay, the hell with my 8 minutes. Go ahead, Paolo.
How we know, because I'm still struggling with that, I can see how we would apply to government or institutions in which you change the people, which the problem is not with the people themselves, as we can talk about, but the way that they're expressing. And by changing the people, we fine. But what about Walmart, that was created, constructed to found the motivation? The exploitation is the act of the Walmart.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, mind you, I never patronized that particular chain, and we have fought very hard to keep it out of our town nearby us. But I think it would still nonetheless be possible. I mean, call it a faith position, if you will, that in every person there is both good and bad. And if you get them to step back, contact what's good in them. I mean, here's an example I just used in a preface to a book that I was asked to write. In the tsunami in 2004, U.S. Marines were called in to do flood relief work and distribute food. And a Marine in Sri Lanka was interviewed at the end of a day, very long, hard day, very dangerous work. He said, I have been serving my country for 30 years, and I never got any fulfillment out of it until today. So I even argue that you wouldn't have to disestablish the military, just disarm it. Contact those people in the military who are like this particular Marine, in whom the consciousness of service was always really there, and use it for different things. I mean, there used to be a U.S. Army brigade. I don't know what they did with it. It was called the 1st Earth Battalion. And these people were all about protecting the Earth. Jordan, did you have a question?
I had a couple of questions on this. One was just an announcement, actually, people want to learn more about MST or indigenous resistance activists and
Yeah. That's right.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
And go to their website, et cetera, et cetera,
Mhm.
Also, I guess one of the things I'm trying to understand is why people, even if a corporation like Starbucks trying to like materially and economically some good things, why people still have some sort of weird feelings where they're like, Walmart's allowed me to go into doing really great economic material. And I think it's also the consciousness that we're not just material economic
Yeah.
creatures, that we have other insights into
Yeah.
what seems right to us. And
Yeah.
the mechanization and uniformity of culture, I think that does mean a lot of things to people in terms of
Yeah.
for me, that's where even if some of these institutions, like a Starbucks, do start taking on better economic and material practices, there's still this other part for me that is hard to let go of, but
Yeah.
it's still very important. And
Yeah.
I guess the other part of this for Veterans Embargo is not taking responsibility off the individual and culture and
Yes.
transforming, but understanding that potentially certain institutions, i.e. businesses like the Rose Experiment, can lubricate those certain desires for effects from coming out of people in a way that other institutions.
Yeah. Well, you said a lot, Jordan, and the main thing that I'll pull out, I think, is about the responsibility piece, and it's like the choice thing that we were talking about before with the Sarayaka women, that the thing that made corporations so bad was the decision in the 19th century, which wasn't like most decisions. Most of the most important decisions were never discussed. They just happened. It's a funny thing about our very talkative civilization here. But this decision that corporations had rights. Because you take responsibilities away from people and give rights to corporate entities, collectives, you've made such a huge mistake that it's not recoverable. And this is at the very heart of the damage that's been done by the corporate system. So I think we would have to go that far, and I hope we will in the years to come, building down that system and reorganizing it. While I would not insist that there be no corporations. They somehow have to be corporations acting as corporations, not corporations pretending to have consciousness as people, because it's people who are giving away their consciousness to those corporations. So, Joe, you're going to have to come up and tell me your comment after class. So I'm going to try to show you a clip from an MST film and part of an interview from a Gandhian who visited Meta a while ago. Repeat Jordan's announcement that next Wednesday in La Peña in the evening there will be actual presentation by someone from MST. Okay, this was a great conversation. I enjoyed it very much. Hope you did also.